Now, in pretty much every application, we need to know something about the currently logged in user, their user ID, their email, their name, whatever. How do we do that? Very easy. In ng on init, once again, we start with this .af.auth. Now, this property is actually an observable. So anytime there is a change in the authentication state, we get something from this observable collection. So we can subscribe to this, give it a function, auth state goes to. Now, when ng on init is called, this observable will fire a null value because the user is not logged in. So if auth state doesn't have a value, that means the user is not logged in. So I'm just going to display not logged in. Otherwise, I will display logged in, and next to that, I will add this auth state object so you can see what it looks like. Let's look at the result. Back to the browser. Okay, here in the console, you can see that I'm not logged in. Now, if I click the login button, a pop-up will appear for me to log in via Facebook. Okay, here's the pop-up. Because this is the first time I'm logging in via Facebook, Facebook is displaying this notification. Pepper will receive your public profile and email address. And that means we're going to get the user's display name, their email address, and their photo URL. If there are additional information we want from Facebook, like a user's photos, friends, and so on, we need to specifically ask permission for that. So I'm going to continue as Mosh. Now the pop-up will disappear. Back in our Angular app, you see we have two entries in the console. The first one is logged in message, which is coming from subscribing to this observable. So as I explained before, anytime there is a change in the authentication state, like when the user logs in or logs out, we get something from our observable. Now in a real-world app, perhaps you have a login page. On that page, when the authentication state is changed, you may want to redirect the user using a router to somewhere else. What happens after that is really dependent on how your application works. Now back here, we have a second entry in the console with the label after login. And this is the result of execution of this line. So as I explained, because we are using the pop-up method, the user is still on the page, so we can execute extra code. Now let's inspect one of these auth state objects. You can see they both are identical. So let's have a quick look here. We have this property here called UID, which stands for Unique Identifier. And this is an identifier that Firebase generates to uniquely identify a user per app, irrespective of the authentication provider. So whether I log in that user with Facebook or with Google or with their email and password, this is how Firebase will uniquely identify that user. So in your application, if you want to associate a user with some other objects like their tweets, their messages, their photos, this is the identifier that you need to use. We also have a provider property here, which is 2, which represents Facebook. We have a Facebook property, so any additional information we get from Facebook will be under this property. And we also have this auth property, which is generic. Okay, you learned how to get the currently logged in user by subscribing to auth observable. Now, I want to change this code. So instead of logging something in the console, I want to display the user's name and photo. So as you saw earlier, this auth state has a property called auth. And from here, we can get display name, email, whether the email is verified or not, whether the user is anonymous or not, their photo URL, and so on. So I'm going to get this display name and put it in a field in our class. Let's call that display name. And of course, we need to declare a field here. So display name. I also want to declare photo URL. And here we set photo URL to auth state.auth.photo URL. So this is when the user logs in. And when they log out, I want to clear these fields. So this.display name, set it to null, and same for photo URL. Now we can make this code a little bit cleaner, so we can return immediately here. And this way, we don't need this else block here, because the control would never get to this point. Now let's go back to our template. In the heading, I want to render display name. I also want to add an image, set the source to photo URL, and I want to render this element only if photo URL has a value. Let's look at the result. So, because I'm currently logged in, when this page is loaded, you see my name and photo. If I log out, they disappeared. If I log in again, here we have the name and photo again.